Okay, so I was just practicing a little bit and I ran into a little snag and I started working through it using a little strategy, and I thought I should just jump on and quickly share this a little off the cuff. Um, so it was this chord, not particularly challenging on its own, but it was in the context of this phrase. Also not particularly difficult. But I was finding that I slow down a little bit. My hand doesn't quite want to jump to that chord with all the other things going on, because there's a mental bandwidth issue, and part of that mental bandwidth issue means that there's some bottleneck in what I'm doing, and I will be talking about that in a future video about bottlenecks for sight reading and how to address them. And I'm not sight reading here, but it's the same concept. So basically, I'm just not, on its own, if I was just playing the left hand, no problem. But there's just a lot going on. I'm drinking in notes, and just I was a little slow getting my hand around that. So I want to sort of address it from a technical standpoint, that like my hand doesn't want to jump to this chord shape. So one of the things I would do is I would quickly figure out what the chord is. It's this A minor 7, right? It's just in a weird inversion. Now, part of the reason that I probably am weaker at this chord shape is that it's not a chord shape you would use a lot. It's not a chord shape I use a lot anyway. Because if, you're playing like a jazz tune, you would normally voice something with, a shell or just something a little more spacey. Because it's a little chunky down here, right? Especially if I play that in root position, it's muddy. It doesn't sound great. And most of the time, if I'm playing, jazz stuff, I would be using this 9 chord version of it. I like this voicing. And that also means that if I'm playing this in my left hand and there's a bass player, I'm playing it right there. I'm not playing this version. Anyway, that's why I'm maybe a little less comfortable with it. I don't run into thick, chunky 7th chords in my left hand that often. And I'm actually running into a few here. So the strategy here is to take this chord, this A minor 7, I'll start down here, and then I would just play it through all of its inversions, and I would just think through those up and down. And this is one of those things where I would encourage, at least at the beginning, look at your hand and make sure that you're doing things very accurately. And there I've just played A minor 7, I'll play it up and down 2 or 3 times, and then I'll just move around the circle of 5th, so D minor 7, which is the same shape. But sometimes you'll find that even using the same shape, if you're playing it somewhere else on the keyboard, it feels a little different from a proprioception standpoint. So it's definitely worth even doing the same shapes, chords that share the same shapes in different keys. And it makes you spell those chords, because you'll actually have to think about how to spell a D minor 7. Keep moving around the circle of 5ths. I'm going in 4ths, by the way. So G minor 7, play down here, super muddy, right? Do the same thing there. A couple of times, probably 3 times each time, and a little cleaner when I'm not talking about it. And I'm just trying to think through it, and then just, keep moving. C minor 7. Oh, of course, you notice that G minor 7 was a different shape. I'm obviously a little more comfortable playing this shape, and it's probably because C minor actually is not terribly muddy. A C minor 7 can be voiced here without being as muddy as the A minor 7. So, but we're just moving around the circle of 5ths or 4ths and just playing it in keys as we go. And this probably would take you a little longer if you're less comfortable with these things. But the idea is to just do this, and you'll eventually cover all of the shapes that this chord progression would cover, right? Because we covered this one, that's all white notes when we got to G minor 7. We had this one black key when we got to C minor 7. We had 2 black keys here for B flat minor 7. It's mostly black, and there's one white key. That would be the same thing. Sorry, if I did let's see, so is there anything that's all blacks? I don't know if there's an all black key for this in minors. But anyway, you'd cover all of them. Yes, it's E minor 7. E flat minor 7 is all black keys. Oh, and that one's a little jank. So you end up covering a lot of technical ground. You get a little spelling ground. It's just a great way to cover this, and like I've covered it in every key. My hands have gotten used to it because the shape is the same. Even though I'm going for like, let's just take root positions, right? Here's this A minor 7. That's the same shape for this F, sort of the C minor 7 or the G minor 7. It's this thirds thing, right? And for almost all of these, I'll be using the same fingering. Occasionally, I might find myself using 4 instead of 3, but it's the same shape. So you're actually reinforcing that shape in your hand and getting more comfortable addressing it with different combinations of black keys. So it makes it slightly less boring than just sitting there playing this one passage over and over and just hoping you get it. Yeah, that'll get me a little better at that, but this is going to get me so much more rounded so that when I run into other spots with that chord shape, I'm less uncomfortable with it. And I will tell you, in this piece, I have run into several of these chunky 7th chord voicings that I wouldn't normally use in my left hand, and I am struggling with a lot of them. Struggling is probably a strong term, but I lag. My brain lags a little bit because I'm just like, wait, that's an uncomfortable thing to do. And this is just a more general principle. If you are not in a place where you need to be doing, this particular thing. I mean, this is a great example because I pulled it out of a piece of music I was working on specifically. This is where I can take something, this is a challenge in a piece of music I'm actually working on. How can I make this a technical exercise? But just as a foundational thing, start with your major triads, because that's a great thing. These shapes are used all the time. So you should be able to jump through all these inversions of these in both hands. And it's fine to practice them hands separately. In a lot of ways, it's better because you'll catch little things, little subtleties that you might not. I talk about that a lot. Sometimes when you're practicing things like scales, hands together, your right hand covers up how messy your left hand is. So practicing hands separate is valuable until both of your hands are really in good shape. And then you can just practice them hands together quickly as sort of a refresher, and then move, same thing. It's move through all the keys. I always would say do that, go through all the keys, but it's really useful to just be able to play those shapes because you run into these shapes all the time. Even if you're not playing them as block chords, you're running into them as arpeggiated versions of themselves. You could make a variation of it where you're doing that also. Or a really difficult version I hate is moving up this way, but arpeggiating down. And then the opposite way. Yeah. A little messy there, right? But no, you run into these things all the time. I literally am just looking down towards the end of this piece, and I have this where I'm playing that exact, I'm just playing a shape, right? I'm playing this G minor chord up the scale, or up the inversions. It's written down just like that. So it's definitely worth it to try to do these kinds of things in every key. And that's just one of those things where it's like, I ran into this little headache, and maybe I'll, I in this case, I just sort of stopped and ran through it because I knew that I could get through all the keys in, I don't know, a couple of minutes. I ran through all the keys in maybe 5 minutes, 3 repetitions. I wasn't, no metronome, just how fast can I get my hands around them and really think and spell and be in control. And, normally I would recommend putting that towards the end of your practice and making that, if it's a big problem, make it part of your technical practice that you're hitting daily. But if it's just a tiny little thing, you can just kind of stop for a second and make that a technical exercise and then run through it very quickly and then get back to work. Anyway, hopefully that's helpful.